Here's the challenge. At the moment, a lot of rules about British life are made in Brussels, and even those that are made here in Westminster often refer to the EU in some form. Moreover, the bodies and regulators and courts which adjudicate on disputes are European. The European Court of Justice, the European Banking Authority, the European Aviation Safety Agency. So what happens when Britain leaves the EU, apparently by March 2019? Which rules apply, which don't, and which bodies and regulators and courts actually adjudicate on disputes? Theresa May's answer is the Repeal Bill. This bill converts all EU law into British law and just makes edits where absolutely essential. Simple? Unfortunately not. In fact, the Repeal Bill could be one of the first signs of just how tricky the practicalities of Brexit are. I came to speak to Ian Lang, a former Conservative Trade Minister and one of the authors of a report which warns that the parliamentary processes will be put under significant strain by the Repeal Bill. Lord Lang, you've been in Parliament since 1979. Have you known a challenge like the Repeal Bill before?
No, it's a unique piece of legislation. It's undoubtedly the most important bill that we will see in this extended session of Parliament. But curiously enough, I don't believe it is the most controversial by quite a long way. Because essentially this bill is one about mechanics. It's about how we legislate, how we get all the legislation that at the moment is in the European Union, over 20,000 legislative items, back into the United Kingdom. We see the need for greater powers to be given to the government on a temporary basis, and that's very important. But equally, the bill has to be scrutinised very thoroughly, and the power of Parliament to do that must be enhanced.
The question is, I guess, whether Parliament's up to it, whether they can handle all this work in a short amount of time.
I think we are up to it, provided parties realise that their obligation is to cooperate in the interests of Parliament and in the interests of the nation.
What's your bet then, over the next 2 years debating this piece of legislation? Is it going to go through smoothly and all be wrapped up as the government wants, or are there going to be hiccups along the way?
My bet is that not everyone will be as sensible and realistic as I am being with you at the moment.
So here are some of the takeaways. One is that this bill is about converting law and not about amending law. Where the government wants to make significant, substantial changes on things like immigration and agriculture, it's introducing separate legislation to the Repeal Bill. Another takeaway is that there are going to be clashes between parliamentarians who want scrutiny and ministers who want discretion in how they make decisions. And that's really crucial because whatever the Repeal Bill says, it will have to be compatible and make allowances for a final Brexit deal whose actual provisions are not known. What could some of the pitfalls be for the Repeal Bill? I came to speak to Joanna Cherry, who's a Scottish National Party MP and the party's Justice spokesman in Westminster.
From my point of view as an SNP MP, my main concern is that the bill should be properly open to scrutiny, and most importantly from Scotland's point of view that it shouldn't turn into some power grab whereby powers that have been devolved to the Scottish Parliament are brought back to Westminster.
And you're a lawyer, so this is your meat and drink to some extent. What do you think about your colleagues in Parliament? Are they going to enjoy this kind of going through very detailed EU legislation, working out what still can apply and what doesn't actually make sense if we're out of the EU?
Well, I mean, it's a nightmare, and we hear that the civil service are not nearly on top of it yet, and that's no disrespect to them. I don't see how they possibly could be. I don't think it's going to be an enjoyable process for anyone. In my view, it's a completely unnecessary process and underlines the lunacy of the whole notion of Brexit, and in particular leaving the single market.
Brexit will go down as a big moment in the constitutional history of the United Kingdom, a moment when laws and regulations and regulatory regimes and court decisions made on the other side of the English Channel perhaps cease to apply over here. So I've come to King's College London to speak to Andrew Blick, who's a history lecturer here and who's written a book on the Constitution.
Very difficult to unpick what is European and what isn't European in origin, and for that reason it's going to be equally difficult to try and unpick that on the other side when we're trying to move on beyond our EU membership. There may be some real difficulties around the idea that we're going to preserve the rights of European citizens from other parts of the EU who are in the UK, because they may regard it as essential that they still have access to the European Court. If that's been written out of UK law, this may come up as an issue in negotiations, and it will be very difficult to resolve within the current projected model. There's a tendency, particularly with this kind of legislation, to leave some of the more complicated legal constitutional bits to the Lords, that the Commons says, well look, this is just too complicated for us, let's leave it to the Lords and they'll sort it out. If they do that, they can, but then they can't necessarily complain at a later stage that the House of Lords is inappropriately asserting itself and behaving in an undemocratic fashion. So we may see some interesting tussles around that issue in the coming Parliament.
Some people have called the repeal bill a tidying up exercise. In fact, it may be more like moving house. Lots of things need to be packaged up, some of them thrown out and some of them are actually replaced. The challenge for Parliament is to act like a careful removals firm and to ensure that not too many things are broken in the process. Henry Mance, Financial Times, London.